respected colleagues, scholars, supporting staff members, and dear students. On behalf of Siliguri College of Commerce, we would like to welcome you to the International Conference on War, Migration, Human Rights, and Ethical Theories.
Across regions, war and armed conflicts have been persistent drivers to displace populations, fracture communities, and test the moral foundations of political order. These realities demand rigorous analysis that bridges empirical research with normative reflection. Today, we gather to examine how ethical frameworks illuminate responsibility and violence and movement, and how human rights can be reimagined and enforced in the times of crisis.
On this note, we would like to request our honorable guests to please take their seats on the dais. I would like to call upon our honorable chief guest, Shri Gautam Deb, Honorable Mayor, Siliguri Municipal Corporation, Siliguri. Sri Ranjan Sarkar, Honorable Deputy Mayor, Siliguri Municipal Corporation, Siliguri. Sri Dilip Duggar, Honorable Chairman, Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Authority. Honorable Professor Dr. Deb Kumar Mukherjee, former Vice Chancellor, Kuch Bihar Panchanon Borma University. Honorable Advocate Sir Sri Arun Kumar Sarkar, President Sir, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, Honorable Principal, Siliguri College of Commerce. Honorable Professor Tommy Lehtinen, University of Vasa, Finland. Honorable Professor Renu Juneja, Valparaiso University, United States of America. Honorable Professor Polly Wainwright, Valparaiso University, United States of America. Honorable Professor Don Habibi, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, United States of America. Honorable Professor David Rowland, Valparaiso University, United States of America. Professor Dr. Bhaskar Biswas, Registrar Acting, University of North Bengal. Professor Dr. Ranjan Roy, Professor, Department of Geography and Applied Geography, University of North Bengal. Dr. Nitai Chandra Saha, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Shumitra Naha, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Nidhu Bhushan Das, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Shujit Ghosh, Principal, Siliguri College, Siliguri. Dr. Zinia Mitra, President, Governing Body, Siliguri College. Sri Debabrata Shur, Associate Professor and Organizing Secretary, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Sandeepan Bhattacharya, Associate Professor and Joint Convener, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Chinmoy Sarkar, Assistant Professor and Joint Convener, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Kartik Chandra De, Honorable Principal, Parimal Mitra Smriti Mahavidyalaya, Malbazar. Sri Shubrata Mallik, Assistant Professor and Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Raju Sarkar, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce.
After that, also.
Now, we would like to request our chief guest, Shri Gautam Deb Sir, to inaugurate the conference by illuminating the light. I will request our other dignitaries to please join him.
शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तु ते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तु ते दीपज्योतिर्परब्रह्म दीपज्योतिर्जनार्दनः दीपज्योतिर्परब्रह्म दीपज्योतिर्जनार्दनः दीपो हरतु मे पापं सन्ध्यादीपनमोऽस्तु ते ओ दीपब्रह्मरूपस्त्वं ज्योतिषां प्रभुरव्ययः ओ दीपब्रह्मरूपस्त्वं ज्योतिषां प्रभुरव्ययः आरोग्यं देहि पुत्रांश्च मतिं स्वच्छामि मे सदा रवेरस्तं समारभ्य यावत् सूर्योदयो भवेत् रवेरस्तं समारभ्य यावत् सूर्योदयो
Thank you so much, dignitaries.
यस्य तिष्ठे गृहे दीपः
I would like to call upon Professor Dr. Pranab Mishra, Honorable Principal, Surya Sen Mahavidyalaya, to please take the seat on the dais. Professor Dr. Shavita Mishra, Honorable Principal, Naxalbari College, to please take the seat on the dais.
Now, I would like to request our esteemed guests to inaugurate the newly published abstract book for the conference.
Fast, fast.
The newly published abstract book on this international conference, War, Migration, Human Rights and Ethical Theories, is being opened up by our esteemed guests in this international conference. Please have a round of applause, everyone. So before we begin our conference journey, we bow our hearts to Ma Saraswati, the eternal source of wisdom, art, and melody. Ma Saraswati's Veena gives us the harmony of knowledge, and in her serene presence blossoms creativity and grace. May this Saraswati Bandana purify our minds, illuminate our thoughts, and bless this moment with divine rhythm.
जय मां सरस्वती भवानी, जय मां सरस्वती भवानी, दयानी दुखहारिणी, दयानी दुखहारिणी। जय मां सरस्वती भवानी जय मां सरस्वती भवानी जय 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 सुर नर मुनि गावे जय 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 सुर नर मुनि गावे दास ब्रज श्याम ध्यान लगावे दास ब्रज श्याम ध्यान लगावे विनती करहु शरण रे माता विनती करहु शरण रे माता अंत के तुम हो नारी जय मां सरस्वती भवानी जय मां सरस्वती भवानी सा 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 गा गा पा पा गा पा गा रे गा 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 पा 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 नी नी पा नी पा गा पा 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 नी 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 सा सा गा रे गा पा गा नी पा नी सा रे गा पा नी पा नी सा रे गा पा नी पा नी सा सा रे गा पा नी पा नी सा सा रे गा पा नी पा नी सा जय मां सरस्वती भवानी जय मां सरस्वती भवानी दयानी दुख हारिणी दयानी दुख हारिणी पाप विनाशिनी बुद्धि वरदायिनी जय मां सरस्वती भवानी जय मां सरस्वती मां सरस्वती मां सरस्वती
Now, we have along with us Dr. Karthik Chandroday, Honorable Principal, Porimal Mitra Smriti Mahavidyalaya, Malbazar. I would request her to please join us on the dais. Now we would look forward to our felicitation program. I would request our principal sir to felicitate our honorable chief guest, Shri Gautam Dev, Honorable Mayor, Siliguri Municipal Corporation, Siliguri.
বলতে থাক
Shri Dilip Duggar sir, Honorable Chairman, Siliguri Jalpaiguri Development Authority.
তারা এখানে দাঁড়িয়ে
অরুণ কুমার সরকারের পরে রঞ্জন সরকার না।
কি আগে কে
Honorable Professor Dr. Dev Kumar Mukherjee, former Vice Chancellor, Kuch Bihar Panchanan Burma University.
নেক্সট নেক্সট
Advocate Shri Arun Kumar Sarkar, Honorable President Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Honorable Professor Tommy Lehtinen, University of Vasa, Finland. Honorable Professor Renu Juneja, Valparaiso University, United States of America.
ফেলিসিটেশন ঠিক করে হচ্ছে না
সাইডে দাঁড়ান, সামনে চলে যাচ্ছে।
Honorable Professor Polly Wainwright, Valparaiso University, United States of America.
এখান থেকে দাঁড়া, ওইদিকে যাবি না, এখানেই দাঁড়াবি, একটা সাইডে পেছনে থাকবি, বেশি আগে চলে যাচ্ছে। উঠবি না, পেছনে চলে যাবি, চলে আয়, তুই সামনেই থাক ওখানে। আর
Honorable Professor Don Habibi, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, United States of America.
সামনে যাবি না, সামনে যাবি, পেছনে চলে আয়।
Honorable Professor David Rowland, Valparaiso University, United States of America.
পিছে চলে আয়, পিছে চলে আয়। হ্যাঁ, ওখানে এর থেকে আগে না।
Dr. Kartik Chandra De, Dr. Kartik Chandra De. Dr. Principal. Honorable Principal Sir, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sharkar, Siliguri College of Commerce, I would request our Honorable President Sir to felicitate him. Please give a big round of applause. Dr. Nitai Chandra Shaha, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Nitai Chandra Shaha, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Sandipan Bhattacharya, Associate Professor and Joint Convener, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Sandipan Bhattacharya, Associate Professor and Joint Convener, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Chinmay Sharkar, Assistant Professor and Joint Convener, Siliguri College of Commerce. Dr. Chinmay Sharkar, Assistant Professor and Joint Convener, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Shubhrata Mullik, Assistant Professor and Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Shubhrata Mullik, Assistant Professor and Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Can we get a big round of applause from the end of audience? Dr. Kartik Chandra De, Honorable Principal, Parimal Mitra Smriti Mahavidyalaya. Dr. Kartik Chandra De, Honorable Principal, Parimal Mitra Smriti Mahavidyalaya.
খালি ব্যাগ দিতে পারবেন প্রিন্সিপাল বলে যারা
Dr. Savita Mishra, Honorable Principal, Nakshal Bari College. Dr. Savita Mishra, Honorable Principal, Nakshal Bari College. Dr. Pranab Mishra, Honorable Principal, Surjo Sen Mahavidyalaya. Dr. Pranab Mishra, Honorable Principal, Surjo Sen Mahavidyalaya. Sri Raju Sarkar, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce. Sri Raju Sarkar, Honorable Member, Governing Body, Siliguri College of Commerce.
Welcome and rest.
Now, I would like to request our Honorable Principal Sir, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, to please deliver the welcome address.
Very good morning to all of you. Namaskar and pranam. Honorable Chief Guest, Sri Gautam Dev Sir, Mayor, Siliguri Municipal Corporation, our distinguished and esteemed resource persons from across the seas, Professor Tommy Letnan from the University of Bhasa, Finland, Professor Don Habibi from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, USA, Professor David Rowland from Professor Polly Windwright and Professor Renu Junipero from Valparaiso University, USA, Professor Gordon Hayes from the University of South Carolina, USA, respected faculty, my colleagues from various colleges, our respected Chairman SJDA, Tuggar Sir, Honorable President of our college, Arun Sir, and my colleagues and my dear students and members of the media and all distinguished guests present over here. A very good morning to all of you and most heartful welcome to each one of you at our international conference on war, migration, human rights and ethical theories today at Dinabandhu Mancho. It is my profound honor and privilege as the principal of Siliguri College of Commerce to stand before you today and extend a warm welcome to this landmark event, the India International Conference on War, Migration, Human Rights and Ethical Theories. Today, we gather not merely as an academic institution hosting a conference, but as a community of thinkers attempting to grapple with some of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time. Our world is witnessing unprecedented levels of displacement, conflict, and a troubling reassessment of fundamental human dignity. In such a landscape, to retreat into silence or indifference is not an option. We must engage, we must question, we must seek ethical anchors. This conference represents the very essence of that engagement. It is a bridge between theory and praxis, between the global and the local, and between seasoned scholarship and youthful inquiry. To the Honorable Chief Guest, Sri Gautam Dev Sir, we are deeply grateful to your gracious presence today. Your leadership is steering our dynamic city of Siliguri, which itself understands the nuances of movement, borders, and coexistence, lends immediate and practical relevance to our discussions today. Your insights will be invaluable in grounding our ethical theories in the reality of governance and community life. To our illustrious panel of resource persons, Professor Letnan, Professor Habibi, Professor Rowland, Professor Windwright, and Professor Junipero, and Professor Hayes, we offer our deepest gratitude to all of you. You have traveled great distances, both geographical and intellectual, to be with us. Your expertise, your diverse philosophical traditions, and your commitment to this dialogue are the cornerstones of this conference. We are truly privileged to have you, such eminent minds, illuminate our path over the next 2 days. I would like to commend the relentless efforts of our faculty members, the organizing committee, and our students obviously, whose dedication and hard work over many months have transformed this vision into a reality. Organizing an event of this international stature is no small feat, and their commitment fills me with immense pride. To all the delegates, academicians, researchers, and students present over here, you all are lifeblood of this conference. Your participation, question, and your perspectives will shape this collective exploration. I urge you all to engage actively, to listen with the openness, and to contribute with courage. As an institution of higher learning, Siliguri College of Commerce has always believed that education must look beyond the confines of commerce and to address the larger human conditions. This conference is a testament to that belief, and we hope that the dialogues initiated here will not end with the valedictory session, but will resonate in classrooms, in research, in policy considerations, and obviously in our individual consciousness. In the spirit of collective learning and shared humanity, I once again extend a warm welcome to all our guests who are present over here today. May this conference be a platform for challenging conversations, for empathetic listening, and for sowing the seeds of a more just and ethical future. Thank you, and may the proceedings be enlightened and impactful for our future generations. Thank you so much once again for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to call upon our Honorable Chief Guest, Shri Gautam Deb Sir, Honorable Mayor, Siliguri Municipal Corporation, Siliguri, to please deliver few words.
Very good morning to everybody. The esteemed guest coming across the globe, especially USA and Finland. As a mayor of Siliguri Municipal Corporation, I heartily welcome you people all for attending this conference, global conference, international conference being organized by Siliguri College of Commerce. I'm really indebted that the organizers has chosen me for attending this conference as a chief guest here. We strongly believe this matter which are being discussing for the 2 days long conference, war, migration, human rights, and ethical theories. Several research scholars, students, they will be presenting their own contention through their papers, and the most important persons, those who are coming from abroad, they will be encouraging and putting immense value in this very important matter which are facing our society, our country, and everywhere. Especially Siliguri, strategic location of Siliguri is that it's the place surrounded by several national and international borders. It is the gateway of entire northeastern states, 6-7 states, and several other important states like Bihar and Assam also. So this kind of academic discussion with specific direction, it will help boosting our morale and will take some important notes from the outcome of this seminar. I think the entire proceedings will be recorded and some booklet will be published after this conference. It will help our students, our society for knowing many things which are generally not being discussed at our platform. So we are very much eager to hear from the esteemed guest, educationist, those who are coming across here from far away, USA, Finland, and any other foreign countries. They will be deliberating, and it will help our, not only our students' communities, but our society at large, some important note, direction, decision from this international conference. I wish all the success of the conference, and I again heartily welcome all the dignitaries and guests who will be staying here today. I again wish all the success of your international conference. Today I'm in a hurry because I'll be going outside and my flight is very nearby. So after attending 2-3 another programs, I have to go and reach Bagdogra on time. So I'm in a hurry and I take leave from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have with us Honorable President, Siliguri College, Professor Dr. Jinia Mitro. I would request our principal, sir, to felicitate her. Professor Dr. Jinia Mitro, Honorable President, Governing Body, Siliguri College, to be felicitated by our principal, sir, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar. Dr. Jinia Mitro, Honorable President, Governing Body, Siliguri College, being felicitated by our principal, sir, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar.
Now, I would like to request Professor Dr. Debkumar Mukherjee, former Vice Chancellor, Coach Bihar Panchan Burma University, to deliver his speech and share his valuable thoughts with us for this international conference.
Honorable President of the Governing Body of Siliguri College of Commerce, Honorable Mayor, just who left the stage right now, Honorable Chairman of the SGDA, Mr. Dugal, and Principal of the College, Ranjan, members of the Governing Body of this college, my old friend, Professor Tommy, Professor Don Habibi, Professor David, Professor Gordon, and other dignitaries on the dais and off the dais. Other principals of the neighboring colleges, presidents of the governing bodies of the neighboring colleges, and also teachers of this college, my dear students, It's really a beautiful privilege on my part to be here, and from the innermost chamber of my heart, I express my sincere thanks to Professor Ranjan for inviting me over here to say few words. They have chosen a beautiful topic, and to speak the truth, I'm a member of the Indian chapter of Cross Culture, and I'm connected with the society since long. And it's a very beautiful platform that takes various current topics for discussion all over the world. And you'll be happy to know that almost every year in different parts of North Bengal, we organize this type of seminar. This year, this is Siliguri that going to organize this beautiful seminar. And the topic that has been chosen, it is very much important from the point of view of the current situation. We all know that war pulls sufficient fund from the budgetary allocation that could have been used for developmental works. If you go through the budget of any country, of the neighboring countries, including our country, you will see that the budget that has been allocated for the educational aid, but it is less than the defense budget. So, I am of the opinion that in absence of war, the total fund that could have been used for the developmental purposes, for the education purposes, for health, and for other purposes, our country and other countries situated in this subcontinent, they could have developed more and more. And this war not only disturbs the total social structure, but also the life and livelihood of the people. So, I am sure this type of conference and the paper and our resource persons who are here, who are going to present their beautiful papers, they will present such papers. They will open vistas for the new research, for the young scholars who will do their research in the future on this topic. Certainly they will get some new ideas, and our research person will touch upon all these aspects that will create a new environment for the research of the coming days on this topic, as because this is very much important from the point of view of this juncture. So with this short note, I do hereby conclude. Before that, again, from my side, from our organization, cultural, that is the cross culture, and I must express my sincere thanks to one person, Professor Chandana Chakraborty, who is the key person of our society, and today she is absent. Also Kishore Chakraborty also is absent. These two persons, they are creating this environment in total world and in our India also. And due to their ill health, they are not in a situation to come over here. And I express on behalf of these organizers, I express my sincere thanks to Chandana and Kishore. Thank you very much. Have a nice time for this conference.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable speech and your thoughts to share with us. Now, I would like to request one of our honorable professor from the overseas to deliver a speech and share his thought on this international conference, Human Rights, Migration, War, and Ethical Theories. So, I'd like to request Professor Tommy Lehtinen, University of Vasa, Finland, to please share your thought and some lecture with us. Thank you, sir.
Cute, sir. Cute.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Honorable Mayor Gautam Depp, the Siliguri College of Commerce and its principal, Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, for their warm hospitality and gracious welcome, as well as for hosting this timely and meaningful international conference on war and migration. Thank you for this great opportunity and for this wonderful opening ceremony. I'm sure that we all international guests, scholars, and visitors will definitely remember this particular ceremony. So thank you for all of you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I will request our Honorable President, Advocate Shri Arun Kumar Sarkar, to please deliver a few words.
Respected dignitaries, distinguished resource persons from the United States of America and Finland, eminent academicians, scholars, students, and dear participants, good morning to you all. It is indeed a moment of great pride and honor for me to welcome you to the International Conference on War, Migration, Human Rights, Ethical Theories, organized by our college, Siliguri College of Commerce, and inaugurated today at its historical venue, Dinabandhu Manch. The theme of this conference is both timely and deeply significant, considering the situation all over the world. In the contemporary world, war and conflict continue to displace millions, forcing migrations across borders and cultures, while raising serious questions about the human dignity, justice, rights, and ethical responsibilities. As such, at such critical juncture in global history, academic discourse on these issues is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a moral imperative. We are truly privileged to have with us 5 distinguished professors from the USA and 1 eminent professor from Finland as our resource persons. Your presence has elevated this conference to a truly global platform. I extend my heartfelt gratitude you all for sharing your scholarly expertise, international perspectives, and rich experiences with our academic community. Your contributions will undoubtedly deepen our understanding of the ethical and humanitarian challenges facing the world today. Siliguri College of Commerce primarily believes that higher education must engage with global relations and social concerns. Although we are known primarily as an institution of commerce and management studies, we also recognize that economic development cannot be separated from ethical values, human rights, and social justice. This conference reflects our commitment to holistic education and integrates knowledge with conscience. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the principal, Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, our college, whose collective efforts have made this international academic event possible. Organizing a conference of such magnitude with intentional participation requires vision, dedication, and teamwork, and I commend the entire team for their hard work. I am confident that the deliberations over the next 2 days will generate meaningful dialogue, encourage critical reflections, and inspire collaborative research on where migration, human rights, and ethical theories. May this conference contribute not only academic enrichment, but also to fostering empathy, global understanding, and responsible citizenship. With these few words, I wish the conference every success and formally declare the International Conference on Wire, Migration, Human Rights and Ethical Theories inaugurated. Thank you very much for your kind presence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to request Honorable Professor Dr. Jinia Mitro, Honorable President, Governing Body, Siliguri College, to please deliver a few words.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words. First, I must thank Siliguri College of Commerce for organizing this international conference on the very, very relevant topic, war, migration, human rights, and ethical theories. Basically now that we see a lot of migration and displacement happening across the world, there is war, and these questions of human rights and ethical theories, they weigh on our psyche, right? So we see a lot of even gender theorists like Judith Butler. They are turning to ideas on vulnerability, because basically after post-COVID, we are aware that how vulnerable we are. Of course, because of war and because of other issues that's happening all around. How vulnerable we are all open to vulnerability. And then there is this idea of grievability, which has become a very, very political issue now. The deaths that we can grieve and the deaths we cannot grieve. So while these are, in the academics, these are the discussions happening around. So this is a I find this is a very, very, very interesting topic, and that brought me here. because I wanted to listen to the discussions. I will welcome all the delegates who are from abroad who have come, and thank you for being here. I am sure that we'll have a very, very engaging conversation together. Thank you very much. Thanks to Siliguri Commerce College for organizing this seminar, international conference. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, we will move forward to our next session, that is the keynote address. So, I would like to request our esteemed speakers, guests, and professors to take their seats so that we can start the first session keynote address.
Can we collect this later?
Yeah, sure.
First keynote address will be by Professor Tommy Lehtinen, University of Vasa, Finland, and his topic is Bhagavad Gita and Manavadharmastra on War and Migration. This keynote address session will be chaired by Professor Dr. Deb Kumar Mukherjee, former Vice Chancellor, Kuch Bihar Panchan Burma University. So I would like to request Professor Tommy Lehtinen to please be on the dais and start his keynote address. I request Professor Dr. Deb Kumar Mukherjee, sir, former Vice Chancellor, Kuch Bihar Panchan Burma University, to be on the dais and chair the session. Wait, no.
will be delivered by Professor Tamilettan. He has come from Finland, Vasa University, and after just few minutes, they will start. start his lecture.
So, in my presentation, yeah, right. So in my presentation, I will discuss the views on war and, to some extent, migration in two classical Hindu texts, namely Bhagavad Gita and the Manava Dharma Sastra, or the Law Code of Manu. The Bhagavad Gita is a revered spiritual scripture, while the Law Code of Manu is the best-known legal text from ancient India. Although neither of these texts is philosophical in a scholarly sense, they include historically, ethically, and philosophically intriguing ideas on war and, to a lesser extent, migration, which are also relevant and thought-provoking to a contemporary perspective. As all of you are aware, the Bhagavad Gita is set against the backdrop of a decisive battle in the Mahabharata, an ancient Indian epic. According to Zuzana Spíková, a Czech scholar, the Mahabharata combines two streams or schools of thinking about laws of wars in ancient India. The first school, what we could call an idealistic or chivalric school, can be found mostly in the Law Code of Manu and in the prescriptive portions of the Mahabharata, especially those by the great Kuru patriarch Bhishma. This stream of thought prescribes several rules of war. It specifies whom a hero cannot fight against and which weapons are prohibited. It presents details about when and where one cannot fight, and it prescribes that if an opponent is disadvantaged in any way, a warrior must refrain from attacking him. This school presents the ideal of Dharma Yuddha, fighting according to Dharma, a fair or just war. The second school of thought, found most prominently in Kautilya's Arthasastra and in the Agni Purana, presents means of Kuta Yuddha, or crooked war. It teaches that disadvantages on the opposing side or for one's opponent must be exploited, and that in warfare, victory is the only goal worth pursuing. Spíková states, anachronistically or not, that in the Mahabharata, the Kuta Yuddha school is represented most prominently by Krishna, an avatar of the god Vishnu, who serves as the charioteer to the warrior Arjuna during the Kurukshetra war. In this paper, I focus on the idealistic school's views on war and migration, despite parts of Krishna's statements in the Bhagavad Gita being considered as non-idealistic views. These views, both idealistic and non-idealistic, have had significant impact not only in India, but also globally, as demonstrated by the vast numbers of readers of the Bhagavad Gita translations in various languages. The Bhagavad Gita is not directly identified with any single classical Indian philosophical school or tradition, but it is deeply influential for several of them and is considered a synthesis of many philosophical strands within Indian thought. Specifically, it draws from and harmonizes elements of Vedic ritualism, Upanishadic philosophy, Samkhya metaphysics, and yoga practice, as well as devotional bhakti traditions. The Gita is regarded as a Brahmanical text which uses Ramanic and yogic terminology to reconcile renunciation with action and to propagate the idea of living according to one's dharma. While the Gita is not a foundational text for any of the 6 classical Orthodox or Astika schools, it is especially significant for Vedanta and particularly the Advaita, Visishtadvaita, and Dvaita interpretations, each of which reads the Gita in light of its own philosophical commitments. The text is thus a bridge between multiple schools rather than the sole property of any single tradition. Despite being spiritual literature rather than a philosophical treatise, the Bhagavad Gita offers an interesting philosophical perspective on war and, to lesser extent, migration. Because it provides a nuanced ethical framework which strikes a balance between duty, or dharma, righteousness and restraint, rather than merely celebrating violence. The Bhagavad Gita's perspective on war is conceptually rich. It integrates spiritual, ethical and existential reflections into the practical dilemma of fighting a war, advocating for a just cause, disciplined action and moral restraint. This nuanced approach resonates with modern ethical discussions on the conduct and the justification of war. Although spiritual in nature, the Bhagavad Gita addresses the ethical quandaries of war in great detail, which makes it pertinent to philosophical debates over the ethics of conflict. The Gita frames war as a necessary duty for a warrior, kshatriya, when it is fought to uphold righteousness and justice, and not for personal gain or vengeance. To this end, Krishna urges Arjuna to fight because it is his dharma to restore moral order, thus introducing a concept akin to a just war theory in an ancient spiritual context. The Gita emphasizes that a warrior must cultivate a state of equanimity, indifference to pleasure and pain, victory and defeat, and act without passion, hatred, or desire for personal gain. This internal calm and self-restraint are essential to preventing unnecessary harm and violence. In this way, it presents a profound ethical stance on the conduct of war, rather than only its justification. Krishna teaches that the soul is immortal and that physical death is not the ultimate reality. In the Gita, this philosophical view is expected to remove fear of death and to encourage performing one's duty without attachment to the outcome, which reframes the existential stakes of war in spiritual terms. The Gita does not glorify war, instead acknowledging its tragic nature and the suffering it causes. Accordingly, it urges caution and responsibility, arguing that even a just war must be fought with a spirit of peace and ethical restraint. In this way, the Gita promotes an idealistic perspective on war. Even though in my talk I focus on the Bhagavad Gita, it should be noted that the greater Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita forms the part of the sixth book, also offers other material which is relevant for discussions of a just war. In fact, the Mahabharata is the first written discussion of a just war in world literature. For instance, in the Mahabharata, one of the 5 songs of King Pandu asks if the suffering caused by war can ever be justified. A long discussion then ensues between the Pandava siblings, establishing criteria such as proportionality, just means, just cause, and fair treatment of captives and the wounded. I will now provide an overview of the key spiritual and philosophical ideas in the Bhagavad Gita, which uniquely address the issue of war. First, the Bhagavad Gita offers a practical approach to moksha, or liberation, and to freedom from samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. According to this approach, known as karma yoga, or the yoga of action, salvation results from attention to duty and recognition of the past acts which inform the present and will direct the future. Thus, in the karma yoga path, dharma and karma, fulfilling one's duties and responsibilities in life, and retributive justice, determined by how well one obeys their dharma, respectively, are assumed to be the basic factors affecting one's fate and destiny. The central tenet of the Karma Yoga path to liberation is the principle of niskama karma. Niskama karma, literally action without desire, denotes an action performed selflessly and obediently, without any expectation of reward or result whatsoever. The Bhagavad Gita calls this idea inaction in action, and action in inaction. Even if the term itself does not appear in the Bhagavad Gita, niskama karma is arguably the central teaching of the text. At the text level, this argument is based on verse 18.6. I quote, "But having relinquished all attachment and actions fruits, even these actions should be performed. This is my decided ultimate conviction, O son of Pritha." End quote. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna proclaims that humans are entitled only to actions and not to the results thereof, whether good or bad. Therefore, they should not desire any results. Krishna's advice that people should not desire any results from their actions can be interpreted in different ways. What is of utmost importance is that humans are not doomed to idleness or inactivity, but instead should act according to the principles of the universal order, Vrta. At the same time, because they are not entitled to the results of their actions, they should not be selflessly concerned about outcomes. Although it is admirable to perform good deeds and to participate in well-intentional activities, the results of those actions should not be associated with their actors. Instead, according to the Bhagavad Gita, the positive outcomes of actions should be understood as representing the world's welfare, or as the term lokasangraha is often translated, the common good. Thus, the outcomes of actions are not ultimately under the control of individuals, who, after all, are instruments of the bringing about the ultimate reality, which is often understood as the fulfillment of God's internal designs. Consequently, humans have the right to use the outcomes of their actions for good, but they do not own those outcomes, nor do they deserve praise for their good deeds. Rather, credit should be attributed to God, or if a non-theistic framework is preferred, to karma and destiny. I will now return to what the Bhagavad Gita says about war. In light of the above discussed moral and spiritual principles, especially the principle of niskama karma, it is important to focus on the Bhagavad Gita's narrative framework. Set on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Bhagavad Gita addresses the ethics and necessity of war through a dialogue between the warrior Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna, who is revealed to be an incarnation of the divine. As seen, the text explored not only the immediate question of whether Arjuna should fight, but also broader issues of duty, morality, and the inner disposition required in times of conflict. Many readers, both ancient and contemporary, associate the Bhagavad Gita's position on war with the concept of duty. However, it is important to understand that the Bhagavad Gita does not see war as a duty for everyone, but for those whose social role requires it. Usually, such a role is assigned to warriors or soldiers, such as Arjuna. The Bhagavad Gita emphasizes the importance of fulfilling one's obligations without attachment to personal desires. Verses 3.8 and 3.19 offer a well-known textual evidence in favor of this viewpoint. I quote, "You must do the necessary action, for action is superior to inaction. Therefore, always perform unattached the deed to be done. For the man performing action while being unattached attains the supreme. We should know that Krishna's statement is not solely deontological or related to duty ethics. It also includes consequential tones concerning the positive outcomes of fulfilling one's duties, namely entrance to heaven and attaining divinity. By also considering less idealistic aspects of war, Krishna paints for Arjuna a scenario ensuing after a refusal to fight, in which negative social consequences, such as shame, disgrace, and cowardice, are vividly described in consequential tones. Moreover, in the last 3 chapters, namely chapters 16, 17, and 18, Krishna associates the fulfillment of one's duties with adherence to the principles of sacred writings, especially the Vedas, as well as to prescribed rites, repentance, and the act of giving alms. As a warrior, Arjuna's duty is to fight in a just war, particularly when the cause is righteous and necessary to uphold moral order. Krishna tells Arjuna that refusing to fight in such circumstances would be a failure of duty and could have negative consequences for society, as it would allow injustice and oppression to prevail. The Kurukshetra battle is clearly framed by the Gita as a dharma yuddha, a righteous war, where fighting is justified to restore justice and to combat evil. As I said, while the Gita accepts the necessity of war under certain conditions, it does not glorify violence or carnage. Instead, it emphasizes minimizing suffering and pain. To this end, Krishna advises Arjuna to engage in battle only after attaining a state of inner balance. That is, seeing pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat as equals. This detachment ensures that the warrior acts without passion, hatred, or personal desire. The Gita also insists that the warrior's conduct must be marked by restraint, calmness, and self-control. Here, violence driven by anger or vengeance is condemned, even in a just cause. The Bhagavad Gita also frames war in moral and spiritual dimensions. In spiritual dimensions, which are often taken to represent the core of the Gita. The Gita uses the battlefield as a metaphor for the inner struggle every person faces, the war within, between conflicting duties, desires, and ethical choices. Krishna teaches that self-mastery, detachment from the fruits of one's action, and acting according to one's dharma without selfish motives are essential for spiritual growth. The text recognizes that war brings destruction and sorrow, and that upholding righteousness sometimes requires difficult choices. To summarize, the Gita sets limits of war and critically considers the justification of war. The Gita justifies war only as a last resort, after all efforts at diplomacy and peace have failed, as was the case in the Mahabharata narrative. It cautions that war must never be waged for personal gain, for revenge, or out of uncontrolled emotion, but only to defend justice and restore balance. The Gita advises against seeking revenge. Instead, it promotes forgiveness and justice, emphasizes that the pursuit of peace is more important than vengeance. I now address the question of migration in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita does not directly address political migration, but its teachings offer relevant philosophical guidance. On this point, the Gita emphasizes the universality of soul and the superficiality of bodily distinctions, such as nationality, race, or caste. For example, verse 5.18 states, I quote, "The learned see the same in a Brahmana, endowed with understanding and culturedness, in a cow, an elephant, even a dog or a dog cooker," end quote. This verse and other similar teachings suggest that viewing people primarily through the lens of nationality or bodily identity is spiritually limiting. The Gita criticizes a mindset which only sees differences between people based on their bodies, which can be extended to nationalist or exclusionary attitudes towards migrants. While advocating for compassion and inclusivity, the Gita also recognizes the need for practical considerations. It suggests that families or countries should extend care to others, especially to less fortunate, as much as practically possible. At the same time, it acknowledges the legitimacy of protecting one's own community or nation for economic, social, and security reasons. Thus, the Gita's approach discourages both extreme exclusion or xenophobia and indiscriminate inclusion or radical globalism, instead calling for leaders to balance universal compassion with responsible stewardship. The extremism of the first view is opposed by verses in the Gita, which present the universality of living entities based on the soul. Such verses either imply or outright condemn viewing people according to the bodily concept of life, as in nationalism. According to the Gita's perspective, we cannot address the situation of illegal immigrants solely through legal principles, without first considering them as living spiritual beings. At the same time, we cannot ignore laws designed to protect citizens when dealing with individuals living in a country illegally. Although the Gita certainly speaks about the principle of universality, the underlying value against nationalism, it also promotes the value of reciprocity in view opposed to indiscriminate globalism. Reciprocity involves caring more for those who depend on one, such as family or citizens who depend on the government. This care with distinction principle is founded on suitably reciprocating with others in one's care, and such partiality transcends selfishness. With regard to the issue of immigration, both universality and reciprocity, as exposed in the Gita, can be appropriately applied. Every entity, be it family or country, should understand that superficiality of bodily distinctions and so extend itself as far as possible for all people, taking those less fortunate into one's fold to whatever practical extent one is capable of. However, it is also reasonable for a country to protect its borders and show special concern for the needs of its own citizens for economic, social, and security reasons. It is important to remember that the Gita also figuratively employs the idea of migration, especially in relation to journey of the soul. It draws a distinction between the material world and the spiritual world, describing the latter as a realm of eternal joy. Through the development of genuine devotion to Krishna, one is invited in the spiritual realm rather than forcing or infiltrating. This symbolic migration highlights the Gita's focus on spiritual aspiration and internal development over actual relocation. According to the Gita, anyone can achieve spiritual freedom, moksha, regardless of caste, gender, or race. This spiritual inclusivity further supports the belief that societal or national boundaries are less important than the underlying unity of all creatures. I will now proceed to introduce the Law Code of Manu, our second classical Hindu text. The Manava Dharma Shastra, more famously known as the Laws of Manu, Manu Smriti, is the best known legal text from ancient India. Its special status among legal authorities was established by the 5th century in the Common Era, at the latest, and possibly as early as the 3rd century in the Common Era. The Law Code of Manu is generally recognized as the defining document of Brahmanical Hinduism. The concept of dharma or law originally referred to rites and ritual obligations. Ritual activities, especially those relating to the life cycle from conception and birth to death, traditionally played a central role in the lives of Brahmins, those of the highest varna or social class. However, by the time of the Law Code of Manu, the term dharma, which appears in the title Manava Dharma Shastra, had taken on a wider meaning to encompass all that constituted proper conduct and the right way to lead one's life. This moral dimension of dharma plays a central role in the Law Code of Manu. In addition, the book includes very detailed rules and regulations pertaining to civil, criminal, and administrative law. Although the Law Code of Manu derived much of its material from earlier sources, the book is not merely an anthology. The eponym Manu is an alias or assumed name with a long history. Before the Law Code of Manu, proverbs and sayings were ascribed to Manu, who was viewed by later generations as an ancient sage and lawgiver. Manu was also regarded as the first human being, the progenitor of humankind, and at least according to one tradition, the first king. It appears that the intent of using the name Manu was to make this treatise on law more authoritative by connecting it to both the order of famous sayings and the first king of humankind. This authoritativeness of the Law Code of Manu is further augmented by the statement that the teachings of Manu agree with Vedas, the oldest sacred texts from ancient India. This is explicitly expressed in verse 2.7. I quote, "Whatever law Manu has proclaimed with respect to anyone, all that has been taught in the Veda, for it contains all knowledge." End quote. The Law Code of Manu presents a textual history of itself, wherein it describes the original treatise to Brahma, the Hindu code of creation, and the father of Manu. In this way, the Law Code of Manu seeks to present itself as an eternal document, parallel to the Vedas and composed by the Creator himself. According to the frame story, Manu taught the treatise to his pupils, including Purgu, who was appointed to act as a spokesman who recites the treatise to other sages. Tradition presents the existing version of the Law Code of Manu as the edition proclaimed by Purgu. Our work focus here is now on how the Law Code of Manu engages with the topic of war. Chapter 7 on the Law Code of Manu provides principles for the conduct of war in detail in two separate sections. The first of which starts from the verse 87 and the second from the verse 181. The principles cover the issues of a just war quite broadly, to the point that they can be referred to as warrior ethics. Emphasizing restraint, humanity, and fairness, these principles of warrior ethics establish norms which closely parallel many modern humanitarian standards. There are 6 key principles of warrior ethics from the Law Code of Manu. First, there is a distinction between combatants and non-combatants. The Manusmriti explicitly forbids harming civilians, non-combatants, or anyone who has surrendered. Ordinary people and those not involved in combat are not to be targeted. Furthermore, the Law Code of Manu stipulates a universal dharma, including non-violence, truthfulness, purity, etc., for all 4 varnas. And according to Medhatithi, a famous commentator of the Manusmriti, for all humans. Second, there are rules of engagement and prohibited weapons. Warriors must not use concealed, barbed, poisoned, or fire-tipped weapons. Striking with unfair means or from behind is condemned. In short, combat should occur openly and with honor. The third principle is the protection of the vulnerable. According to this principle, those who surrender are unarmed, are sleeping, are fleeing, or are otherwise incapable of fighting must not be harmed. This principle is in line with another one, namely that for a Kshatriya, the highest law is to protect his subjects. The Law Code of Manu also emphasizes that the king should always honor the sick, the afflicted, children, the elderly, and the poor, among others. The fourth principle is fairness and proportionality. To this end, the use of force should be proportionate, and excessive violence is discouraged. Collective attacks on a single warrior and striking a disadvantaged opponent are forbidden. The fifth principle addresses conduct after victory. The conqueror must treat the vanquished humanly, offer amnesty to those who surrender, and avoid vengeful acts. Looting is discouraged. Instead, the conqueror should grant tax remissions and seek to win over the populace. Finally, the sixth principle underlies that war should only be used as a last resort. War should be avoided, since both victory and defeat are unpredictable. However, if all other strategies fail, the king should wage war in such a way that he will defeat his enemies. This latter view in the Law Code of Manu can be seen to represent a school or stream of thought called Kuta Yuddha, which teaches that disadvantages on the side of one's opponent must be exploited, and that in warfare, victory is the only goal for pursuing. To summarize, the Law Code of Manu prescribes a code of war which prioritizes ethical conduct, protection of the innocent, and restraint, thereby reflecting a strong humanitarian tradition in the ancient Indian thought. These principles were designed to limit the destructiveness of war and to safeguard human dignity even amidst conflict. According to the Law Code of Manu, war should be a last resort. Negotiation and peaceful resolutions should always be sought first. Furthermore, the use of violence must be limited to what is necessary to achieve the intended outcome, and without excessive harm to innocents. On this latter note, the use of force should be directed solely at combatants, not civilians, women, or children. The laws prohibit attacks on people who are vulnerable, such as those who have surrendered or are unable to defend themselves. However, one should also keep in mind that in general, the goal of warfare is to defeat one's enemy. How then does the Law Code of Manu address the issue of immigration? The Law Code of Manu does not directly address the issue of immigration as it is commonly understood today, namely as the movement of people across national borders for long-term residence. However, the text discusses the family and social responsibilities of individuals who travel abroad. Chapter 9 discusses the responsibilities of a husband planning to travel abroad, stipulating that a man should not leave his wife behind without ensuring her subsistence during his absence. The Manupasya by Methatiti, about 1,000 in the Common Era, clarifies that the injunction is meant to ensure that the wife is provided for with food, clothing, and other necessities while the husband is away. There is no explicit mention in the Law Code of Manu of rules or laws governing the admission, rights, or treatment of foreign immigrants or travelers entering the community or polity. The text focuses more on maintaining social order and family responsibilities, rather than regulating the movement of people into or out of a region. While the text discusses the concept of varna, or social class, mobility and the possibility of individuals changing their social status based on merit or circumstances, while the text discusses the concept of varna mobility and the possibility of individuals changing their social status based on merit and circumstances, this is not framed in terms of immigration or migration between territories. In short, the administrative and judicial structures described in the Law Code of Manu are concerned with local governance and do not reference policies for newcomers or immigrants. Now, we are in a position to formulate a conclusion concerning idealistic views on war and migration in classical Hindu literature. The Bhagavad Gita presents a nuanced view of war. It acknowledges the tragic necessity of violence in defense of justice, but it insists that such action must be guided by duty, restraint, and a spirit of detachment. The text ultimately advocates for a warrior ethic which values self-mastery and the minimization of harm, turning the justification for war into a moral and spiritual question. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that even in war, actions must be performed selflessly, without attachment to outcomes, and solely out of a sense of duty. This is the heart of Niskama karma, and it transforms the battlefield into a ground for spiritual growth rather than personal ambition. The Law Code of Manu seeks to regulate everyday life, while also addressing religious devotion and its social implications. As a specific regulation of life, the Law Code of Manu prescribes a code of war, which prioritizes ethical conduct, protection of the innocent, and restraint, reflecting a strong humanitarian tradition in ancient Indian thought. These principles are aimed at limiting the destructiveness of war and safeguarding human dignity, even amidst conflict. The Law Code of Manu emphasizes that war should be a last resort, with negotiation and peaceful resolutions being prioritized. Violence should be limited to achieve the intended outcome without causing excessive harm. The Bhagavad Gita, while not addressing migration in the modern political sense, advocates for a balance of universal compassion and practical responsibility. It challenges attitudes of exclusion based on bodily identity, encourages care for all people, and recognizes the need for responsible governance. Its teachings ultimately point towards a vision of humanity, united by the common spiritual essence of all beings. The Law Code of Manu, for its part, does not offer guidance or laws on immigration as such, but it does provide rules for individuals traveling abroad, especially concerning their family duties and responsibilities. Based on these two texts, the idealistic outlook regarding war and migration in classical Indian literature takes two perspectives: a spiritual and dutiful endeavor, and a chivalric law of just war. Finally, I would invite you to ponder what the realities of modern warfare and how the realities of modern warfare and migration connect with the viewpoints presented in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tommy. It's a very beautiful presentation consisting of two ancient texts of Indian sculpture. One is Gita, another is Manu. Now, for discussion, house is open. I invite questions, comments, and discussion from the house. Please, it is open. Any question from the students, scholars, teachers, and our resource persons? ছাত্রদের যদি কোনো কোশ্চেন থাকে, স্টুডেন্টদের যদি কোনো কোশ্চেন থাকে তোমরা বাংলাতেও বলতে পারো যদি মনে হয়, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই। দ্যাট উইল বি ট্রান্সলেটেড। স্যার, হ্যাঁ বলো, প্লিজ প্লিজ।
Hello, sir.
Please.
Thank you for your beautiful deliberation, sir. You were talking about, detachment, I think, during your presentation, right?
Right.
And, so far as human beings are concerned, we are all, we often say that man is full of contradictions. We are bundle of emotions. Is it possible to have this kind of detachment in the real world? Because whenever we say that, we often say that desirelessness is the stepping stone towards success. Even desirelessness is also a desire.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Actually, if we go through T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, Eliot was, resorting to, Upanishad. He was talking about Datta, Damayata, and Dadbham, to give, to control, and to sympathize, right? So, how to stop war, right? We need to nurture these things. I mean to say, even if we go through William Blake, pre-romantic poet, he was actually in his poem, A Divine Image, he was talking about mercy, pity, peace, and love. These are so very often we come across that God is a concrete reality, but actually God is a combination of these abstract things like mercy, pity, peace, and love.
Right.
So whenever we want to compose an image of God, we need to take into account all these abstract things. We need to nourish all these things to actually, that is my point of view, that we need to control our emotions, we need to control our anger, right? Because that is the only way to achieve this kind of, spiritual equilibrium, right?
Yeah.
So what is your opinion in that line?
Yeah, thank you very much for your relevant and at the same time, in practice, very, very difficult question, as well as for sharing your viewpoint on this topic. Regarding your question about whether detachment in this life is possible at all, It seems that that if we speak or take the perspective provided by the Bhagavad Gita into consideration, it seems that the whole text or the story in a certain light emphasizes that detachment is very difficult. It's difficult not only to Arjuna, but for all of us. That is basically one teaching or one view, general view, that might be taken as a kind of major teaching among many others in the Bhagavad Gita. It also shows that starting and conducting war is often easier than ending a war. Now, of course, the Kurukshetra war finally was completed, and as we know, Arjuna survived the war. But in many other real-life situations and war, also present one. Take for example, the case of the war in Ukraine. It seems to be that ending the war is extremely difficult for various reasons. Not only for reasons related somehow to our psychological constitution and difficultness of detachments of our various cravings and motives and needs, but also for many practical, economic, political, and maybe even industrial reasons. So I think at least this is something that we can learn from the Bhagavad Gita as far as your question is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other question and discussion? Anyone? Please.
Sir, hello. Thank you, sir, for your valuable lecture. Sir, I have a question within the context and the title of this international conference, the war. Sir, is it possible for a no war? Because when we are talking about a war, actually there is why war happens, like to have a power hierarchy. So when we are talking about war or at the same time the no war, is it like that the society will be unbalanced if there is no war? So what is your point of view on this, war and no war?
Okay, that's a very interesting, intriguing question. It seems that as far as we know, there has been wars between and among humans forever. I already mentioned that the classical Indian text Mahabharata is actually the first text, historically first text that documents discussions regarding the justification of war. So it seems that we are on a safe ground when we say that there has always been wars. But whether it is a kind of law of nature or a kind of psychological necessity or psychological law that requires that there is and will be always wars in one or another sense. Now, maybe again, if we consider Bhagavad Gita, that classical Indian text, part of Mahabharata, seems to suggest that we should understand that the term war is ambiguous, or it can be interpreted in various ways. And at least there are at least two important understandings or interpretation of the term war. And the first one is, of course, the war in its physical, violent sense, the conflict between people that includes killing and various kinds of violation and suffering. But in addition to this kind of physical war, or war between nations or parts of nations, there is a war in another sense that is also discussed in the Bhagavad Gita, and that sense of war is related to our inner struggles, between our conflicting interests and conflicting motives and conflicting ideals and ideas of what we should do. And of these two understanding or interpretation of the term war, I would say that this latter one, namely the idea of war as a kind of inner conflict, that seems to be something which is a kind of, for which we could in a way identify a kind of psychological law, or law in the sense that it seems to be very difficult, if not impossible, to live without war in this interpretation that in a way emphasizes its inner role, or war in this internal conflict sense. But I hope, and I think that as human beings we have at least normative reasons to believe and strive for avoiding wars in this first sense of the term, namely in the sense of conflicts between different countries and regions. Unfortunately, despite the fact that we still have wars, we also have witnessed a longer period of time when there has not been war. So one might expect that why not those periods could be even longer and longer. So I think that we have every reason to believe and act for this kind of view to make it real. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for questions. I think we'll start the next session. Virtually, Professor Tommy has described the total thing. There is one debate, that is going on. There is today, war is an important topic in modern days in total world. But at the same time, we worship Gita, especially in India, as our old script. And the peculiar thing is that already Professor Tommy has already elaborated all these things. What is war and what is that warfare? This is the symbolic warfare that drives in the innermost walls of any persons, and physical death is not the ultimate reality. He explained all these things, explaining to schools, and ultimately he elaborated all these things, and secondly he also described the law of Manu, and taking consideration these two ancient scriptures, his presentation simply is an excellent one. So on behalf of the conference organizers, I express sincere thanks to Professor Tommy for his beautiful presentation. I think this is the next, we will be going to our next session. Thank you, Professor Tommy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tommy Lehtinen and Professor Dr. Deb Kumar Mukherjee. We have next keynote address by Professor John Habibi, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, USA, and his paper titled as Migration, War, Human Rights, and the Emergence of International Law. This keynote address session will also be chaired by Professor Dr. Deb Kumar Mukherjee, former Vice Chancellor, Coach Bihar, Panjan Burma University. Professor John Habibi. Will start the session for the next keynote address. Thank you.
The picture for me.
Your laptop, sir.
My what?
Your laptop, sir.
Oh, I'll go get it.
Without wasting further time, so we should be straightforward to go for the next session, as because we have limited time for the first session. So I request organizer to prepare the technical part so that Professor Don can start his deliberation as soon as possible.
Gotta do this right. Desktop. We'll get there. Famous novel from 1726 by Jonathan Swift called Gulliver's Travels. So I have a illustration from that which helps make my point, if we can get it to work. Maybe I should start while you try and get it. If it doesn't work, it's
not working?
It almost worked there. It was small though, but you had it. There it is. But now if there's a way to make it bigger, maybe. And if not, let's just see. Let me just try something.
No.
No, that doesn't. That's good enough. Let's leave it at that.
But it is not coming. Your name is not coming.
I don't need the name. That's fine. It's fine.
Slideshow from.
Just leave it there.
It is not coming. Why not?
All right. I will just make a few. Just thank you to everybody. You've been gracious hosts. It's my 5th trip to India, and it's one of my favorite places to travel. Okay, so my talk is called Migration, Human Rights, and the Quiet Transformation of International Humanitarian Law. So what I wrote is twice as long as what I'm presenting, so I'm just presenting the first half of what I hope to be an article at some point. And I begin with something that's a bit autobiographical. Because I started graduate school in 1979, and in my 2nd semester, I took a class on philosophy of law. And it's very interesting how the world has changed. That was about 46 years ago or so, 48 years ago, a long time ago. And that became the basis of the talk I'm going to give. So in the past half century, international law
has undergone a serious transformation that would have surprised the people who theorized international law for the past several centuries, including the people who rebuilt the world order after World War II, and I'll get to that. What was once widely understood as an aspirational moral system has increasingly taken on institutional ambitions and now has the coercive force of law proper. Now, the transformation did not happen openly through big constitutional conventions or revolutions. It proceeded quietly, incrementally, through the building of institutions. An architecture has been constructed and enforcement mechanisms are now coming into place. And so the cumulative effect is now coming into focus, and I shall explain. When I first studied philosophy of law, the definitive text among analytic philosophers was a book from 1961 by an Oxford professor, a very famous one, H.L.A. Hart, and he wrote a book called The Concept of Law. And it explains, in a sense, discovers and articulates what law is and what law requires in order to be whole, fitting, and proper. It's not just a series of pronouncements or a dictator dictating. Proper law has a certain kind of structure. And the problem with international law is it didn't have that structure in 1961, all right? And so it did not have the characteristic of being binding, of being enforceable. So in his world, in 1961, the idea of international law was in a primitive state, an immature state. But since then, this has changed. So his argument basically is based on a long tradition of the analysis of English law, but it applies pretty much universally, that for laws to be whole, fitting, and proper, you need primary rules and secondary rules, which I shall explain. Primary rules, that's the easy part. You can have a dictator proclaiming a law. You can have a legislature proclaiming a law. The harder part are what are called secondary rules. And secondary rules explain, it's basically rules about rules in rulemaking. So the secondary rules specify how laws are identified, changed, laws of change, and authoritatively applied. So he basically points out that primary laws, it imposes duty, but secondary rules are the rule of recognition. We need to know that an authorized source is making the law, like a Congress, a Senate, a legislature. Rules of change, how we change laws, how we adjust them, how we build on them, and rules of adjudication, how we decide laws. So without that, if you only have a dictator or primary rules, then there's an uncertainty. There's an inability to change, or change becomes a matter of whim, and it's hard to enforce. So legal systems that don't have the secondary rules, they can force our conduct, but they suffer from an indeterminacy, a rigidity, and a fragility. They're not real, solidly built laws. So in simple terms, any law by definition limits our freedom. All right, it imposes a duty or an obligation on us. And for the law to be whole, fitting, and proper, it needs to be declared by a recognized, legitimate, sovereign authority. Rule of recognition, that's the primary rule. But it also needs a framework, not just to make law, but to decide law, to change law, and enforce law. And those are the secondary rules. So international law basically was aspirational. It tells us what the law is, but there's no mechanism to really enforce it. There's no agreement on what those laws might be or if they apply, and there's no It's lacking a proper structure to be clear and applicable and enforceable. It's aspirational. It's making a moral claim what we should do, but it didn't have the teeth. And international law, maybe it's the law of the strongest, but it did not have the rules of really how these things get enforced, how these things get decided. So for Hart, international law was closer to some kind of international morality, declarations of ethics, but it's not a mature legal system. So Hart's analysis, even when I studied it in 1980, some 20 years after he wrote it, still applied. So that international law, it lacked the substance. It was not real law that is enforceable, that can be consistently applied and all that. It basically puts out there a moral guidepost, but it didn't have the force and power of real law. It lacked the enforcement powers. And no surprise, nations pretty much did what they wanted, especially big nations, strong nations, can get away with doing what they please because there's really no real mechanism that deals with what they're doing in a way that can stop them. All right, so international law, the bottom line, had much more to do with moral suasion, telling us what we ought to do, what would be nice to do, but it lacked the force of real law. Now, so I went for the next 10 years with that idea in my head that international law, when you really look at it, it's not to be taken seriously. I was overseas and I met with a colleague who is an international lawyer. He was working for a think tank and wanted to recruit me to work for his think tank. And I expressed my views on international law, and he said, it's no longer true, or it's soon, what your views are soon to be obsolete. All right, so what Hart had to say, and I'm thinking here, you know, this is 1993 now, it still applies, and he's saying, you're right, it kind of applies, still applies now, but it won't be long, because an architecture was being built to create a serious international legal order. So many international lawyers, jurists, politicians, academics, and other activists were no longer content with international law remaining aspirational. He explained that international law was undergoing a quiet but determined transformation into something truly ambitious. New courts, treaty bodies, monitoring mechanisms, investigative panels, quasi-judicial procedures were emerging across a wide range of issue areas, particularly in the domains of human rights and international humanitarian law, which is another way of capturing the general ideas of laws of armed conflict, in other words, the laws of war, laws of migration, and humanitarian law in general. So in the legal profession, new specializations were being created, such as human rights law and immigration law. They've always existed on some level, but now there's people whose entire careers, their specialization is human rights law or immigration law. Now, crucially, and this is, you know, what was eye-opening for me, this transition into serious legal architecture, serious legal frameworks, proceeded quietly with a degree of stealth. And by stealth, that's another fancy word for quietly, secretly. All right, there is no global constitutional convention, no explicit transfer of sovereignty from nation states to international bodies, or changes ratified by democratic voters in democracies. Instead, authority was growing little by little, incrementally, gaining momentum through institutional expansion, treaty interpretation, and normative entrenchment. The goal was to establish a legal international system with punitive powers, with powers to punish, while pressuring governments to endorse human rights and humanitarian laws that limit state sovereignty. Now, the political implications of this are profound. And the first thing I want to say is, in many ways, this is a great thing. This is a good thing. All right, we want a better world. We want a world where there are international laws that the nations of the world follow. But there are also problems that emerge and balances that need to be struck, and this is a classic case of very good intentions, sometimes leading to really good consequences, but sometimes leading to problems and bad consequences that could have been avoided. So the political implications of this construction of international law, patient and careful as it was, are profound. If successful, or at this point once successful, it would place internationally generated norms above domestic laws, all right, constraining democratic self-government in the name of universal moral principles. So recognize what this means. Sovereignty, especially for democratic societies, shifts from an independent nation state making its laws and deciding democratically what kind of society they want to be. The power would shift from nation states to emerging international bodies with unelected groups of globalized elites. And so the sentence here, which gets to that photo, by the time citizens and legislators grasp the full scope of these changes, meaningful resistance might no longer be possible. So this is what brought to mind chapter 1 of Gulliver's Travels, for, I guess, in the English-speaking world, very famous book, the children's book, as well as a serious, novel. Gulliver is a regular human, but he goes to this strange land of Lilliput, and the people are about 6 inches or 15 centimeters high. He's a giant, but he doesn't even realize he came to this strange island. He doesn't know the people there, but he falls asleep, and when he wakes up, he's tied down by the little people. They tie him down with cords, and by the time he wakes up, he's trapped. He can't move. All right, so he's mightier than them, and later he leads them in battle. Speaking of Professor Latonen's talk, it's a very interesting story, but the image of Gulliver asleep and being tied down, and when he wakes up, he can't move, that is kind of what some people have in mind as far as international law goes. So another way of putting this, John Bolton, I don't know how many of you know who he is. He was an ambassador and the national security advisor in the first Trump administration, and unsurprisingly, Trump fired him, someone he loved and liked, and then he hates and criticizes. But as he wrote in a review of a book called Sovereignty or Submission, that he warns that international law would creep in on little cat feet before the Neanderthals knew what was up. Before people realize this, people are occupied with their own matters, as are politicians. One day they'll wake up and find themselves constrained, in the straitjacket of human rights or international law. So quite a statement. Now, how this occurred and how, there's good reasons to have international legal mechanisms and ways of appealing and ways of enforcing the rules of how nations should behave. So I want to be clear, it's a good thing. But, as is the case with many good things, there's also some downsides, as I will get to, and we should be aware of that so we can minimize the downsides and maximize the benefits. All right, so, and again, part of the way this happens is, a lot of people have very passionate views, and often those are the people who take the lead in building this architecture. Now, that's kind of my introduction, and the next point I want to make regarding migration is the importance of the two world wars, particularly the Second World War. All right, so the contemporary legal world order, the world that we're living in now, is really a direct result of both of those wars, but particularly World War II with respect to migration. All right, World War II, as you know, was a catastrophe. It's the most destructive war in all of human history. So, some 73 million people were killed in World War II. Think of that, 73 million people. To the extent that the Geneva Conventions regulated the laws of land warfare and naval warfare, they utterly failed, catastrophically, to protect human beings. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which has been around since 1863, and they're supposed to regulate and use their soft power to name and shame violators of the laws of armed conflict, utterly failed. The Red Cross colluded with Nazi Germany. They remained silent about Auschwitz and the other Nazi extermination camps, which they knew about. They visited and quietly made their little reports, but kept it secret to the benefit of Nazi Germany. When the war ended, they aided Nazi war criminals to escape. They were not to be relied upon to do their job, and I would say that's still the case. You can ask me about that if you like. Now, World War II, in addition to the upheaval, it generated over 100 million refugees in Asia alone. 95 million Chinese people had to flee. All right, the lethal technologies of World War II, not just missiles and napalm, but the atomic bomb, signaled that nations and humans, we can't continue down this lethal path. We need to do something because war is getting more and more destructive. And when the costs of war, I don't know how you put a dollar or rupee figure on how much money was thrown away in World War II in terms of destruction rather than building. But with the atomic bomb, that was a wake-up call for many people. And a very good quote from that event, Albert Einstein said, "Now everything has changed except the way people think." We humans have this side to us that turns to violence and war. And as Tommy pointed out, war is a pretty persistent thing throughout human history. And even among hunter-gatherers, they have major wars, big lethal battles of one clan against another clan. Wars are endemic to the human species, and now we have these weapons of mass destruction. We've got to change. That was the realization that finally sunk into the heads of leaders around the world after World War II. So among the lessons of World War II was the problem and the fate of refugees, people fleeing war, seeking asylum. 65 million refugees in Europe, as I said, over 100 million in Asia. All right, this is, it's a crazy thing. Before and after the war, before, during, and after the war, most of the Allied powers, the good guys, kept their borders closed. All right, the United States was an open type of society to immigration, but by 1920, I believe 1921, the United States closed its doors to immigration, and that became one of the things contributing to the catastrophe of World War II. The United States kept its borders closed. In World War II, big population transfers, 14 million ethnic Germans were forced to flee Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Russia, and the Baltic states. 2 million people died in the process. 3 years after World War II, in 1948, hundreds of thousands of Jewish Holocaust survivors remained in concentration camps or displaced person camps, trapped after their liberation. Liberation did not mean freedom of movement. Statelessness remained a sentence of prolonged confinement. The United States did not ease its closed doors to immigration until 1964. All right, another consequence of World War I and World War II, decolonization. All right, the map of the world is changing. And as this audience knows, the formation of Pakistan and India displaced up to 15 million people with some 500,000 deaths in this process of people moving between what is now India and Pakistan. All right, the redrawing of the world map, the creation of new nations and states led to ethnic and religious violence, expulsions, and refugee flows that resulted in millions of people dying. All right, the experience of the world wars, the experience of forced migrations left a deep moral scar on the post-war generation, and it was widely perceived not just as a failure of charity and compassion, but as a failure of law and international order. So there was motivation to do something about this problem of making international law real law, whole, fitting, and proper. Sovereignty had been invoked to justify exclusion and expulsion, which stemmed from often xenophobia and racism. Legality had been used to cover up or excuse indifference. The conclusion drawn by many thinking people was stark. If states were left free to define their obligations solely by reference to their own interests, prejudices, or the whims of dictators, similar tragedies would occur again and again. Therefore, a moral international order would remain inconsistent at best, non-existent at worst. Things had to change. So the international response at the end of World War II, or in the aftermath of World War II, was a new international order should be constructed with the explicit aim of constraining state power in the name of universal moral principles. So the United Nations is formed in 1945 to replace the discredited League of Nations, which was ineffective and couldn't really stop the horrors of World War II. The International Court of Justice was created to adjudicate disputes between states. The International Committee of the Red Cross expanded its role in humanitarian protection and oversight of the laws of war, so not just the laws of war, but laws of migration and taking care of refugees. Later, the international criminal law would emerge to hold not just states, but individuals accountable for atrocities, and this culminated in 2002 with the International Criminal Court. So what I was getting at earlier is little by little, the architecture of international law was gaining teeth, strength, traction, and power and authority. At the normative center of all this stood the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from December of 1948. Now, it's formally non-binding, but the Declaration articulates a comprehensive catalog of rights that would soon inform binding treaties and judicial interpretation. Articles 13, 14, and 15, and I think there's 24 in all, were particularly significant for migration. They affirmed rights to freedom of movement, freedom to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution, and freedom to nationality. All the member states of the UN signed on to this declaration. All the states that joined later were required to sign and become signatories as a condition of membership. Now, this universal endorsement gave the declaration unparalleled moral authority. It also created expectations among activists, courts, and affected individuals that these rights were not only aspirational, but owed to everyone. Unfortunately, the authors of the Universal Declaration failed to take rights seriously. For a right to be whole, fitting, and proper, a real right requires a rights holder, that's the easy part, like primary rules, that's the easy part in law, but also a rights provider. For a right to be a real right, there not only has to be humans, say, who have human rights by virtue of the fact that they're humans, there needs to be a rights provider. Who's going to ensure those rights? And certain rights, negative rights, are easy. You just don't interfere with people. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, those are easy. It just means let people do their thing. But positive rights, like the right to welfare, the right to medical care, those are expensive. And for those to be real rights, there needs to be a rights provider. So that's kind of something incomplete about the human rights world that we live in now, because we often have a right, but there's no rights provider, so it's not a real right. So asserting or claiming human rights is meaningless without a responsible rights provider. Now, endorsement by the signatories to the Universal Declaration does not translate into compliance. Authoritarian regimes do not follow freedoms of speech, the press, dress, freedom of worship as a general rule. They get away with it because the enforcement mechanisms are lax. There's not the energy to apply it to all the people who are avoiding doing what they're supposed to do, what they've signed on to do. In contrast, liberal democracies, what John Rawls called nearly just societies, internalize the principles of human rights and international law. So we live in a world where the smaller number of countries that are liberal democracies take rights seriously, take international law seriously, yet a lot more authoritarian regimes do as they please. They do not restrain themselves all the time like they should in terms of starting aggressive wars or violating the human rights of minorities or neighboring countries or closing their doors to immigration. So, and again, there's a problem within the international human rights movement, which I've written on. I'm happy to, anyone who would like, I've written some articles on this, but a problem with the human rights world is that the people running that show are highly selective in where they apply human rights. I was a member of Amnesty International for 19 years, but at this point, I would say Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations are highly politicized. So their interest in applying human rights or international law is still based on politics. Now, nations have their political, economic, diplomatic interests, so it doesn't shock me that nations ignore their commitments based on their political, economic, and diplomatic, and often military interests. But the idea behind empowering non-government organizations like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, or a governmental organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross is a government organization, although it's the Swiss government, famous for its neutrality. They should be neutral. They should apply human rights fairly, but they're very politicized and selective on where they focus their attention and where they don't bother to say or name or shame or publicize bigger, greater humanitarian catastrophes and violations of human rights. So I'm happy to recommend things I've written on that for anyone interested. Now, the next place I'll talk about is migration, refuge, and the expansion of human rights. Now, among the first things that international law has promoted is the right of migrants, particularly refugees fleeing war or persecution. All right, this was the post-World War II project, and it was not an accident that migration became a centerpiece of international humanitarian law. The experience of World War II, the great number of refugees, abandoned survivors, all of these screamed out of an injustice, so the moral imperative was to ensure that people fleeing persecution would not be trapped by borders or the world's indifference in the new legal order. Now, international refugee law developed rapidly. 1951, the Refugee Convention and its protocols established legal definitions, procedural obligations, and protection standards. Asylum ceased to be a discretionary act of kindness or grace and instead became framed as a right, an obligation for the rights providers. Over time, migration came to be understood not merely as a matter of sovereign permission, but as an arena in which individual claims could trump collective decisions, could override collective decisions. Unfortunately, they did not address the important matter of identifying the rights providers. In other words, who is obligated, who is responsible for ensuring the realization of rights holders. And what the law says, if people are refugees fleeing persecution, the first country they get to is the country that's obligated to take them. but often people continue migrating and want to end up in a better country to be in, where they don't have the same status as a refugee seeking asylum. So that's another thing that is overlooked by many people. I see some of you nodding, so that I take that as a good sign. Now, in the laws on migration represent a genuine moral advance. Human rights and humanitarian law has achieved some real successes. And as I say, these are very important from a moral point of view, that people fleeing persecution should get refuge, should get help and assistance once they can escape those places. Human rights and humanitarian law achieved these successes. So individuals fleeing persecution could find refuge, stateless persons get legal recognition, families could get reunited. The old indifference to suffering across borders was no longer morally acceptable. Good progress for humanity. But success carries costs that were not fully anticipated. Liberal democracies, precisely because they take rights seriously, became disproportionately attractive destinations. While many nations simply ignore these commitments, which they dismiss as aspirational or it doesn't apply to them, and they close their borders, the decent societies honor these commitments, only to become oftentimes overwhelmed by migrants claiming refugee status. The burden is not distributed fairly among the nations, and many people have learned to game the system. And when I say many people, I don't just mean refugees, I also mean governments. So an example that I hadn't thought about in a long time is the Mariel boat lift. All right, now this is in 1980, from April to October. Fidel Castro, recognizing the United States had a law that anyone fleeing Cuba would be granted asylum. So he loaded up people that he basically emptied his prisons and mental institutions and sent 125,000 refugees to Florida. And Jimmy Carter, the good person that he was, took them in, and in time, in the fullness of time, they started to recognize this is a large criminal element and a large element of people who required to live in insane asylums and mental institutions. So Fidel Castro took advantage, just took total advantage of these laws that are good laws and exploited it for his own entertainment. And this is, remember, this is April to October of 1980. Early November is when we had elections, and Jimmy Carter was thrown out of office. This is one of the biggest reasons his popularity fell right at the time before the national election. And the rest is history. What might have been different if Jimmy Carter had a second term and instead Ronald Reagan, became a two-term president and is now widely regarded as a fairly successful president. So that's a historical what if, but it's just a little something to throw in that I assume we all need a reminder of if we hadn't heard of it before. So over time, the line between refugee protection and economic migration became increasingly blurred. And again, I don't blame anyone from wherever they're from to want to come to the United States, to want to come to Britain or Germany or Scandinavia. All right, aspiring immigrants have found lots of ways to game the system, and their hosts find themselves burdened with the costs. Legal categories designed for exceptional circumstances were invoked in routine cases where they ought not to have applied. Administrative systems strain to process them. Courts get drawn into deeper policy questions traditionally decided by legislatures. Now courts have to sort of make certain decisions. Germany under Angela Merkel, admitted nearly 1 million refugees from Syria in a short amount of time. This was another dramatic illustration of this dynamic. Similar pressures emerged across Europe and North America. Integration challenges multiplied. Welfare systems faced fiscal strain. And one of the places to look for that, and by the way, it's very interesting to me, you know, as a consumer of the news in the United States, where you're getting your news from. I listen to basically all sides. So from the right, big story is Somali immigrants and this giant multi-billion-dollar welfare fraud in the state of Minnesota. It's a fascinating story. But if you listen to National Public Radio, if they report it, they downplay it and they say there's no evidence. There's evidence. It's very interesting. So lots of challenges to the welfare state, which is hard to sustain. Police and security services find themselves dealing with spikes of criminality and terrorism. Open, tolerant societies saw the rise of nativist backlash. So one of the reasons I say, on the one hand, the laws on asylum and other humanitarian laws, very important, very good. But what must be taken into account is in democratic societies, when one side overplays its hand, it leads to a backlash. So the smarter policies are more careful and prudent rather than setting up a pendulum swinging where we get, and I'll speak for the United States, crazy elections with really bad choices. I've always had to vote for the lesser of the two evils, and you know, all I can say is it's a mess. All right, so we have nativist backlash, public sentiment shifts, public confidence in the manageability of migration has eroded. So like Germany, Sweden, and the US, they've had these shifts from left to right. So now Germany and Sweden have governments with you know, right-wing coalitions. You know, and again, this is not necessarily what the people wanted. It's the lesser of evils, and I can't speak for those countries, but I can speak for the United States and say with great confidence, I'm voting for the, you know, which one is going to cause less problems, or which one can be the corrective to the abuses or bad policies of the other. So tellingly, the Trump State Department has recently warned its NATO allies that they're moving towards civilizational erasure. All right, so think of what that means. That the sort of open migration policies of the decent societies that are Western Europe are creating that will create problems for the future, depending on who you ask. Now, the decent liberal societies also found ways to game the system. So just to give you some examples, Australia, rather than take immigrants coming from, I believe, Indonesia, they warehouse them offshore, on offshore islands, so they don't set foot on Australian soil. Once they set foot on Australian soil, they're obligated to take them, so they steer the ships around and make them, you know, get off on an island, you know, owned by another country, and keep them there. The United Kingdom, Britain, they're flying refugees coming from North Africa to Rwanda. All right, before they get to Britain, or right after they get to Britain, then they're not supposed to, but they fly them and warehouse them in Rwanda, pay the Rwandan government to take them, and hope they'll disappear and go away. The EU pays Turkey, and Erdogan pockets millions of euros for this, to keep Syrian refugees and other North African refugees in Turkey. And again, note all these countries that are closer, that have similar cultures and religion, that have lots of money, aren't taking refugees, because they're not the decent societies. You know, I'll name names. So Saudi Arabia, you know, could be taking Syrian refugees, but they refuse. all right? And I think it's not MBS who's the current king or king-elect, but his predecessor said he'll fork over lots of money to build mosques in Europe. You know, that was his contribution, but they don't want to take in refugees. It's a very interesting thing to note. In the Gaza war, one thing I'll point out is that there's a border with Egypt. Egypt refuses. And again, these are refugees fleeing a war zone. But, Egypt refuses to take them, and for crass political propagandistic reasons, they're trapped because it's part of the war plan. It's sick, if you ask me. It's just not right. But there are all kinds of options that, in a common sense world, would alleviate many of these problems. But there are decent societies and there are societies that are authoritarian and they do what they want. So the decent liberal societies, the last point I'm making, they're gaming the system too. So the time has arrived for the leadership of the democratic nations, at least, to step back and reassess their commitments and to, again, put pressure on other governments to also step up and do what they're required to do by being signatories to the United Nations and the documents that are required of all member states. So the time has arrived for a reassessment of how international law works and where it applies and who gets away with ignoring it. So this mixed record is, an example where human rights can help people flourish and rebuild their lives, but it also raises the question of assimilation, in other words, the melting pot, versus multiculturalism and having refugees maintain their old ways. All right, so lots of refugees have contributed to their new host societies and enriched the culture, but we also find cases where good intentions lead to bad consequences. So the same legal framework that protected the persecuted could also undermine democratic consent when applied expansively and inflexibly. At times, this stems from immigrants who seek to change their new society, insisting on special treatment or accommodation based on their cultural or religious preferences. Even more troubling are cases in which politicized activists subvert the integrity of human rights and humanitarian law in pursuit of their partisan agendas. Enforcement is selective. Democracies are scrutinized relentlessly, while authoritarian regimes face perfunctory, meaning automatic condemnation. The international human rights movement has lost sight of human rights, becoming one-sided, extra harsh on democracies, dismissive toward terrorism and apologetic, and highly selective in ways that bear no correlation to human rights conditions. The result is a growing crisis of legitimacy, one that cannot be dismissed as mere popular resentment or backlash or the people being Neanderthals, being primitive. It is rather a structural consequence of an elitist, politicized, activist rights regime that has expanded beyond its original moral purpose without paying attention to the democratic foundations necessary to sustain it. Their high-minded ideals have crashed against reality. And I'll conclude by saying the democracies of the world, we should all realize they're a minority and they're fragile. We cannot take them for granted. So governments do need to think about the will of the people who should be the sovereign, all right? And their elected representatives should be responsible to the will of the people rather than be elitist and say they know better and take on policies that become either unpopular or even worse, creating big problems for the long term. Now, I don't know what the time is. So how much time? 10 minutes. 10 minutes more. Okay. What I'll do, if you don't mind, is I would just rather take questions. I have a second half of the paper. This is half, but this is the half that was most ready to go. The other half is still being worked on. So are there any questions? Anyone have anything I can explain from what I said?
Hello.
Yes.
It was a brilliant presentation, okay? So you have donned the role of a great presenter, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Dhanyavad.
Yes. So we live in the world of binaries, you know, you were talking about destruction, preservation, light and, darkness, right? We know that light is of no use without darkness, right? So
we wouldn't appreciate it, that's true.
Okay. So we are in a world, we are not in a world of good and evil. Very humorously you have pointed out, we are in a world of evil and lesser evil.
Pretty much you're speaking very realistically, yes.
Yes.
But we should still have a vision of the good.
Yes.
And aim for it.
That is the difference between self-reality and self-image.
Between?
Self-reality and self-image.
Yes.
What we are in reality and what we want to be, aspire to be, right?
Yes.
Okay. So my point is that what is your take on, colonialism in the context of this migration and other things, war, right? Is that era of colonialism and imperialism, is it coming back? History repeats itself. You were talking about Second World War and other things, right? And what is your take on fractured identity in the context of migration? Because even my ancestors, they are from Bangladesh, right? Yes, so they came over here, right? Now, I would like to go back there, right? To seek my roots, right? But I'm not in a position to go there due to the present condition, you know that. So kind of double identity we develop, right? So what is your take on fractured identity, right?
Oh, all right. That's a very interesting question, and a personal one, which I'm happy to speak to.
Yes.
I guess we live in a real world,
yes,
which, as we know, is not an ideal, perfect world. We're not in the Sat Yuga.
Yes.
That's a vision we can hope for. And one of the concepts I develop in the second half is political messianism, having a messianic view. And a lot of activists have a messianic vision, and which is great. Whatever gets you through your life, I'm all for messianic thinking in terms of what we aspire to, but that's what crashes on the rocks of reality.
Yes.
All right, first point. Now, as far as colonialism, that's a good loaded question. And I would say that say a country like Britain would have a lot more obligations toward its former empire than Canada.
Yes.
All right, or the United States has some special obligations to the Philippines,
yes,
or to Mexico. All right, and a lot of Americans realize this, a lot don't. But, and as far as wanting to go to Bangladesh, I've been to Bangladesh. You don't want to go. It's like, imagine Indian cities with 10 times more people, more traffic, yes, more pollution. It's just more, it's miserable. Okay, but technically, I'm a citizen of Iran. My father's from Iran.
Yes.
All right? No way can I go there. All right? When relations were good, this is 1978 when I first started my identity of being a world traveler. I wanted to go to Iran. I would love to go to Iran.
Yes.
But by their laws, I'm a citizen. And this is when relations were good with the United States.
Yes.
They were, allied. But I was, I inquired. The Iran won't give me a visa because I'm a citizen, because my father's from there. That automatically makes me a citizen. And you know what? So we contacted the State Department, and they said, if you go, they could say, you have not done your military service. service. And so once I'm there, and then it was 3 years military service. Well, that was not in my plans. And I'm sorry I didn't go, because 1979, the next year, it got way worse because it's a different government, and a very bad one, I'm not afraid to say. You know, like, you want to argue with me on that, I'm happy to fight that fight. Terrible government. I'm definitely hoping the rule of the mullahs comes to an end. But so some dreams of life, like I hope to go there someday, you know, inshallah, I'll be able to go to Iran someday. But for now, I have to content myself with being in India. You know, on this trip, I was in the Philippines and Sri Lanka, and I'm enjoying it. But I'd love to go to Iran. But if it's stupid for me to go, if it's crazy for me to go, then then life is filled with disappointments and wishes and hopes that don't come true. But as far as colonialism, you know, I'll put it in Indian terms. I think it's very fitting from a karmic perspective that nations that colonized other nations have certain responsibilities or connections to the colonized, and that's a two-way street. So that if people from India want to go live in Britain, great. That, you know, why not? And I would say people from India would have maybe a greater claim to go live in Britain than people from Uruguay or Brazil. And the people in Brazil might want to go to Portugal. Why not? They speak the language. So I hope that answers your question, you know, because colonialism, that's a whole complex thing. But in terms of migration, it makes sense if you want to go to live in another country, get a new start, you know, make your fortune, and you can speak the language. You know, you've got that ease of assimilating into the culture. Why not?
Yes. Sir, you know, one word more. I just appreciate, since I'm a student of literature, so I appreciate your use of metaphor, Gulliver metaphor, at the outset.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, if you want to understand it right.
Opportunity, if there is any other question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other question, please?
I see a hand over there. Maybe
any other question, comment, please?
By the way, like the human rights is like putting on a straitjacket. I don't know if you know what a straitjacket is. You're tying your hands because it limits you. Laws limit your freedom. But we become more free when everyone's got the same limitations. Yes?
Thank you so much for the scope. I'm Shwapna Mitra. I'm an assistant professor of history department in Shohid Khudiram College, Kamakhaguri, which is far from this place. Actually, I am working on Tibetan refugees since 10 years. I have done my PhD on Tibetan refugees in India. And I just not have a questions. I just want to listen from you on some observation, because as now the Tibetan refugees in India, what they are facing, the third generation of the refugees, those who born and brought up in India, they are, by their lifestyle, they're Indians, but by culture, tradition, they're Tibetan. So the young generation, they're facing problems because they can't be integrated with the Indianization, because their motherland is different. And as they're in India, now the maximum of the young Tibetan refugees, they're going to abroad. They're leaving India because they can't get any kind of government job if they are not having Indian citizenship. And maximum of them, they are not taking citizenship, rather they want to keep their refugee identity. So I just want to know from you, because you are expert on this area, what will be their future and what is really...
Okay, a great question. Let me first say I've met the Dalai Lama, and I was in Siliguri in the year 2000. It was my first trip to India. I went to Darjeeling and went to the Tibetan Refugee Center. I have not been to Dharamsala, but The plight of Tibetan refugees is something that breaks my heart. This lady I knew very well, old lady, who was from Burma, a Burmese Jew, and a lot of the Burmese Jews, when the Japanese came, they had to flee, they had to trek across the jungles, and they got refuge in Calcutta. You know, this is one of many personal things I know that, you know, always made India a good place in my mind. Now, as far as Tibet, when Salha Lewis, that's the lady from Mandalay who ended up in Calcutta. I spoke to her one time and she said, when the Chinese conquered Tibet, I cried. You don't know how cruel they are. And I cry over Tibet. In the human rights paper, I talk about Tibet. And because the Tibetan people are so peaceful. You know, if you go way, way back, they were warlike, okay, but hundreds of years, 1,000 years, they were peaceful people, don't bother anybody, living their own unique culture, and out of nowhere, for no good reason, China in 1950, in 51 goes and conquers it, and I've been to China twice. The first time I was in Yunnan province, and trucks coming out of Tibet carrying lumber, carrying like tree trunks. It's just horrible what goes on, what the government has done. It's an authoritarian police state throughout China, but Tibetans can't speak they're forbidden to speak their language, to practice their religion. They have a unique and lovely and peaceful religion. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. And this is my problem. The world doesn't care. The UN did condemn the Chinese invasion in like 1955 or something, but the UN, it's not on the agenda. There's no interest because China can get away with murder. You know, when you're big and strong or rich and powerful, that you can get away with a lot on account of the enforcement mechanisms of international law, and it won't happen, even if the architecture gets built up more and more, and by then it will be too late. So as far as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, do they spend time on Tibet? No. They're hyper-focused on one place, and you can guess what that is. And they overlook, you know, the Syrian civil war, the Yemeni civil war, horrible, horrible human rights tragedies. And in Sudan, you still have race-based slavery. Race-based slavery. In Mauritania, Western Sahara, you have race-based slavery. And they know this, but they don't care. They, you know, this is the corruption. You know, I wouldn't give Amnesty a penny anymore. I used to be very involved, and I came to the conclusion, like so much of elites, they're in their own world, and they're very selective, and they're politicized. They've lost sight of human rights, they've lost sight of morality, and they've got their partisan political agendas, and that's what they spend their time on. And it's very destructive, and it undermines the integrity of human rights. And the United Nations undermines the integrity of international law. So that's the world we live in. You know, and the world that we live in allows for Tibet to remain under the boot to the point where it's a loss of a unique culture, and it's, you know, in a tradition and in a teaching that the world could benefit from, and it's being slowly suffocated. So I'm sorry to be so political, but you asked the question, that's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is the end of this session, I think, and Actually, Professor Dan Habibi has presented a very beautiful already, Nitai already has mentioned that. It's a very beautiful presentation, excellent one, and elaborating all these things that human rights and international law, and he has described all these things critically and mentioning examples from different countries, from USA to Europe, and taking example of other countries also. So, in a word, it was a fantastic presentation. So, on behalf of the conference organizer, I express sincere thanks to Professor Don for his excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
I'm around
Now, this is the time for lunch. We'll be moving towards. Okay, one felicitation, and after that we'll be going back. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We will move forward to the next session, that is the lunch break. And after that, the session will start from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. and we'll gather together in the Ramkinkar Hall, which is downstairs. Okay, and for the lunch, you all are requested to be in our administrative building, Siliguri College of Commerce, and there we'll be providing the lunch as well. So before that, we have a small felicitation program. We have an honorable guest with us. So please, Anka ma'am.
Please say the name, Miss Kanisha Sarkar. Miss Kanisha Sarkar, Director, GIT Jalpaiguri, to be felicited by principals.
I'd like to request our honorable guest, Ms. Kanisha Sarkar, Director, JIT Jalpaiguri, and she will be felicitated by our respected principal, sir, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, Siliguri College of Commerce.
Frame. I would like to call upon Honorable Professor Dr. Ranjan Roy, Professor, Department of Geography and Applied Geography, University of North Bengal, to be there on the dais, who will be felicitated by our Honorable Principal, Sir, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, Siliguri College of Commerce. We have on the dais Professor Dr. Ranjan Roy, Professor, Department of Geography and Applied Geography, University of North Bengal, being felicitated by our Honorable Principal, Professor Dr. Ranjan Sarkar, Siliguri College of Commerce.
Okay, now we'll be heading forward for the lunch in our administrative building, Siliguri College of Commerce. And the next session will start from 2:30 and it will end up at 3:30 a.m. and we'll gather in